Fountain pens are cool. Fountain pen ink though, well, some would say that's really where the fun begins. If you didn't already know, fountain pen ink can have a lot of different and exciting properties, both in terms of performance and aesthetic. Shading is one such property, and my personal favorite. What is shading? It's this. Certain inks can leave a primary stroke that's less saturated, and then at the stroke's end, ink pools where the pen is lifted. This creates two different shades of the same color. Shading is a bit tricky to pinpoint because it's heavily dependent on the type of pen you're using and the paper. You'll see the most shading when you use less saturated ink colors, combined with larger nib sizes and paper that isn't too absorbent. Additionally, even with all of those things, if you rarely lift your pen, you're rarely going to see those ink pools. So your writing style is a factor as well. But I'm not gonna sit here and talk to you about these shading inks. No, I wanted to give you a quick overview before I show you my favorite shading inks. All right, we're gonna start with Pilot Iroshizuku Chiku-Rin. And we're gonna pull up real close here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about when I'm describing pooling and shading. So you see up at the top of this C, it's light, and then down at the bottom C, it's not. That's because I'm stroking slowly and then lifting off, and that is where the shading is gonna happen. You've got a lighter color here, and then a darker pool here. So when it dries, you're gonna get a little bit of a, let's finish the Chiku, here we go. You're gonna a little bit of a two-tone situation there. And this is from Pilot Iroshizuku Chiku-Rin. It's a beautiful, very natural light green. I also really like Jacques Herbin, Vert Olive and Vert Prey. Those are both very great. This one's a little bit more natural in my opinion, but it looks great. These are $23.73 a bottle, and you can get 50 mils there. Now, as you saw, I used print at first, and this does show off shading a little bit more because you're almost guaranteed to be lifting up your pen more often, but you can certainly do script as well. You're gonna get a different, you know, saturation point distributed across everything, but it's, you know, there's no rules here. I'm just trying to illustrate to you how much it depends on you lifting your nib. All right, so, oh man, I misspelled that again. You get my point. So that right there, not a lot of shading except for where I ended and then where I dotted the I. But then if I were to do that, you're already seeing Iroshu. Oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? Suku. Obviously it's not as pretty here, but you do get a lot more saturation at certain points, and you are gonna see that variance in shading. So another thing is what you can do is you can just choose to lift up your nib a little bit more. See, I wouldn't have normally lifted up my nib at these points, but doing so, I am going to get a little bit more shading rather than if I just went quick and did it all in one stroke. You see that? How it's much darker here because I just intentionally lifted. So you can do that if you want. It's a little disruptive, but if you want more shading, that's the way you can go. All right, this is one of my favorite gray inks. This is Silver Fox from Diamine. And I'm using a smaller nib. This is a 1.0, so it's going to be a little bit different than that larger nib. These italic or stub nibs I find are great for expressing some shading. They distribute the ink a little weakly at first and then give you a nice pooling. Now Silver Fox is a great shader. You can already see it's a lighter ink, a lighter gray, so you're already set up well for shading in that regard. And it does saturate more in wider, broader nibs. And like I said, your choice of nib makes a huge impact here. And then once more, if I decided to go a script route, you're going to see a lot more points of pooling than you would if I just did a script. Sorry, if I print route. Printing, you get a lot more shading than you do with script. But again, if you wanted to, you could just kind of take your time with your script and lift up a little bit more often, and you can increase how much pooling you're going to get and how much shading you're going to get as a result. So this is a great color. It is $18 for 40 mils. It is a Diamine ink, as you can see, and it is lovely. Silver Fox. We are now moving on to a Robert Oster ink. And this is one of my favorites now. That is Robert Oster Honeybee. This is more saturated than something we've seen with our previous two inks. So it is going to be a darker color, but it gives you more room to play with. And here I'm not using a stub nib. I'm going to use a broad nib here to show you kind of how different nibs create different levels of shading. And this right here is shading happening live. And another thing that you want to keep in mind, if you are going to seek shading, doing it quickly doesn't leave as much shading as taking your time and going slowly. You see that? Right here, there's a very obvious point where the shading begins. Here, where I went quickly, the whole thing is saturated. So shading is a bit elusive if you are searching for it, but going slowly is something that I like to do if I am looking for it. It really does make a big difference. So Honeybee is a nice balance between brown, orange, and yellow, and I like it because it doesn't quite go full mustard. Not that I have a problem with mustard, but I think that this just looks very natural. So it's a really pleasant color, a very natural looking color. You can get 50 milliliters here for $18, and I'll tell you, I don't ink up colors twice, one after another, very often, but I just recently did it with Honeybee because I love its shading so much. All right, we're going to take a look at an orange now with Diamine Autmn Oak. And this is a favorite, as are all of these inks. Oranges tend to have great shading. And Autumn Oak is no exception. Again, this is a very natural color already, and without a lot of effort. See, this is one that actually does pretty well if you are going to go with script. You still see a good amount of it, but obviously in print you see some extreme examples of the shading. But it is a very good shader. You can see it in full force right there. Stubs are shaders' friends. If you're searching for shading, consider a stub nib for sure. These are only $8 for a little 30 ml bottle. It is pretty saturated, but it does a great job in letting shading come through. All right, the champ is here. We are looking at what is probably the most impressive shader on my list here, and that is Sailor Ink Studio 123. So Sailor is well known for their multi-tonal chroma shading, dual shading inks, and 123 is my favorite. It lies somewhere between a lot of Sailor's other well-known shading inks, like Manyo Haha and Neko Yanagi, and Sailor Ink Studio 223, or 224. And this one is just a nice blend of all of them and sits nicely in between them all in terms of shading, performance, and color. And that's why it's my favorite. This one's a little bit more pricey at $18 for just 20 ml, but it is really impressive. And not only do you get a lighter purple and a darker purple here, but once it dries, I'll show you here in a second, you get a third tone, a nice emerald that hangs out right in between, right at the intersection where the shading occurs, right where your pooling ends. And it really just is something special. And I love this ink for the shading. The color is also delightful, but without hardly any effort, you get that instant shading. Oops. All right, everybody, let's talk about this color right here. Now that's right, I want to talk to you about turquoise. Because turquoise, oops, don't have enough room here. Turquoise is one of those colors that kind of always has good shading. It doesn't really matter which turquoise you choose, regardless of brand, it's just a color that lends itself really, really well to this particular property. Now, the one I've chosen to show you today is Private Reserve Infinity Turquoise, because Infinity Turquoise has a bit of an interesting property on top of its already interesting property, and that is the fact that this ink doesn't dry out. So the Infinity inks by Private Reserve are made to survive extended cap-off time. So you can uncap your pen, kind of ignore it, and this ink is still going to work for you. And I've tested it. It took me a whole day. I wrote with it just once every hour, and it hung in there. So it was very impressive. So if you're going to go with a turquoise, why not go with this one, right? But of course, there are a lot of light blues, a lot of teals, a lot of turquoises that are going to give you this amazing shading effect. It wouldn't be difficult to argue that light blues, turquoises, and teals are just the best for shading. Oranges and, you know, darker oranges are pretty good too, but these colors, you just really can't go wrong. There are a lot to choose from, and odds are you might already have one. The question is, again, are you using the right paper? Are you using the right technique, the right nib? All of these factors are majorly impacting whether or not you're going to see a lot of shading. So you never know. See what you have. If you have a light blue, odds are you could have a little shading party with yourself. Private Reserve Infinity bottles are $15 for 30 mils. Robert Oster makes a lot of good shaders. One of them, one of my favorites, happens to be Cherry Blossom. And this isn't like a super heavy shader compared to a lot of the other ones. I wanted to show you this one because you might not want obnoxious shading. You might want something a little bit more subtle. And this one has a little bit more blending to it than some of the others we're going to showcase today. And it's still lovely. Still very, very lovely. And it's a really unique color too. We have a lot of inks, and it's nice to see one that you can't immediately say, oh yeah, I have one kind of like that. At least I can't. It's just not, you know, not one of your super common colors. But it's definitely worth checking out. I wasn't certain that I would like this color looking just at the swab. It didn't seem like it would be like an instant Drew color, but I've grown to love it, and it has quickly become one of my favorites. And it was really the color that introduced me to all of the different really great shading inks that Robert Oster has. It was this one, and then I just started exploring a little bit more and found that Robert Oster is a great brand to look at if you're looking for shading. This ink, like many others, are $18 for 30 milliliters. All right, now we're going to take a look at Celadon Cat. And this ink is unique in that it was a Reddit ink. It was created, conceived, and produced with the collaboration of the fountain pen subreddit. They came out with this one and another one called Sailor's Warning back in 2023. Oops, here we go, Wake Up Falcon. And it has some great shading. And like Cherry Blossom, this doesn't have like a very quick, very immediate analog that I can think of. It's a pretty unique color. It's a blue, but it's also not. It's kind of green-gray at the same time. So definitely worth checking out. And again, you can see that you do get some natural shading even if you're doing faster script, so you don't really need to, some of these do require you to write a certain way, and some of them don't. This is one of them that doesn't. This one gives you good shading no matter what you're doing, and I appreciate that. I'm trying to show you a good variety here of ones that are pretty universally good shaders,
versus some that require a little bit more of intentional writing. This is a good example of one that just kind of does it. It's a lighter color for sure, but I've used this in thinner, more narrow nibs too, extra fines, and it's fine. You can still see it. It's definitely still legible. But you can see the ink just really wants to move right through there, and where it pools, it's really obvious. You can put your, put it wherever you want. I don't know, that looks terrible, don't do that. But there you go, Celadon Cat by Diamine.
All right, those are the inks. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly had fun doing it. I get to write with fountain pens, so that's always delightful. I happen to be using Tomoe 58 gram paper, loose leaf, so we sell that. I'll link the paper below in the description, as well as all of the inks that you saw here today. So if you're curious to learn more or pick them up yourself, you can click below and find everything you need. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you spending some time with me today. Please have fun and write on.